Now, I'll show you what the rule looked like in a minute so you can get a feel of what the rule is. But essentially, the instructions just said, put a notification on the page that this book is available. Now, suppose, So these are kinds of events that we might think of happening in the web. So the obvious one is page view. The user goes and looks at a web page. But there might also be submit events, right? They submitted a form, or there might be click events. They clicked on a link. There might be change events. Some field changed. There might also be events that are web-related, which are not specifically related to what we think of as events in the browser. So, for example, it could be there's a new bookmark in the browser. That could be an event. And the browser extension could obviously raise that event. But now suppose that we generalize this. So instead of a browser extension, we're going to think of it being a generalized endpoint. And instead of a web page, let's imagine that it's an email client. Now there's a whole different set of events that might happen. An email was received, an email was sent, an email was refiled, and so on. So email provides its own set of events. We think of these as event domains, right? So the web is one event domain, email is another event domain, and there could be other kinds of event domains. Like RSS could be an event domain when an RSS item is received. Facebook just announced their social graph API, and one of the things in the social graph API is a webhook protocol, which means that you can subscribe to things in Facebook. So I could subscribe to your wall, or I could subscribe to your photos, or I could subscribe to a fan page. When that changed, Facebook will call that URL. Well, that could be an event, right? So that you could have rules which actually respond to changes inside people's Facebook information. And then, there's things like mobile. The example I gave at the first was, an SMS message showing up on your phone. So those are just examples of other domains. Now, making all of this work in concert is the Kynetx rule language, right? The language that is at the heart of the Kynetx system. And people ask me a lot, why did you write a new programming language? So the real reason I wrote a new programming language is because writing programming languages is really fun. But I can't tell VCs that because they're not going to pay me money to have fun. So when I'm talking to people who I want money from, I tell them, languages provide a layer of abstraction, and layers of abstraction help a lot. There's an old adage in computer science that there is no computer science problem that can't be solved by adding a layer of abstraction, and there's no performance problem that can't be solved by taking one away. And that's certainly the case here. We are adding a layer of abstraction. And 10 years ago, we probably couldn't have done what we're doing now because machines and browsers were a lot slower. So speed does help. There is a performance hit for this. We're trading some of that performance for increased usability for the user. Okay. So KRL is a domain-specific language. It is specifically designed for responding to events in domains on the internet. I mean these event domains, right, like web, email, etc. It's designed to take actions that are appropriate to those domains, and it's designed to tie into data sources, even authenticated data sources on the web, as we've mentioned, things like Google and OData and other things. The other thing is, I believe that programming languages give programmers mental leverage, and using the right language makes a huge difference. Right? There's no doubt, if you're a programmer, that you probably like whatever programming language you use a lot better than COBOL. I doubt there's anybody in this room whose favorite programming language is COBOL, so I'll pick on that. And the reason is because you think you get better mental leverage by using that language. Well, using a language that's specific to the kind of thing you're trying to do gives you increased leverage. One of the things that I've found in my career is every time I build a user interface, people use it exactly how I expected them to, maybe not quite as well as I expected them to. Right? Nobody ever surprises me with a user interface. Every time I've written a language, and this is like number 3, people shock you with what they do. They come in, it would show you something, you say, how did you do that? Well, it's because languages are, just by their very nature, orthogonal, easily put together, and people can put them together in millions of ways that you can't anticipate. So programming languages, I believe, offer us a lot of power. Like I said, this is designed specifically for programming the internet. And what we've done is tried to create a system that is browser and server independent. Right? So works on Safari, works on IE, works on Firefox, works on Chrome. So if you're out in the audience and you're using the 7-bound internet connection, that proxy service is essentially running KRL, right? That's how it's doing things like putting that little side tab up with the agenda. And I suspect that whether you are using Chrome or Firefox or even Safari on your iPad, it's working for you. And that's our goal, is to make it independent of all of those different systems. Because traditionally, that's been one of the things that's very hard about programming clients. Right? One of the reasons people don't program clients a lot is because clients are fractured. There's lots of differences. John mentioned jQuery earlier. jQuery has done a lot, and other similar frameworks have done a lot to solve this problem. We actually use jQuery. That's one of the ways that we get browser independence, is by layering on top of jQuery. But there's other things we do, like push-button browser extension generation, right? Push a button, get a browser extension. Creating browser extensions, especially for some browsers like Internet Explorer, is not for the faint of heart. And so we take all of that problem out of there for you. So Kynetx rule sets, like I mentioned, have events. And I'm going to show you a lot of events in just a minute. But they do things like page views and submit forms and clicks and changes. Traditionally, things like click and change have been second-class events. They have not been treated the same way that page view has been treated inside the language. Today, that changes. So the event system we're going to announce today changes that second-class event nature. You can declare and access variables and data sources. You can conditionally fire actions, things like put up and notify or change a page or whatever. And then finally, there are effects, things like storing things inside persistent variables so that you can have them the next time and other things. Okay, so let's talk about event expressions. I showed you kind of pseudocode for an event expression earlier. But like I said earlier, event expressions are the ways that we create complex scenarios. And I think that complex scenarios are going to be more and more likely as we expand how we program the internet. Up till now, when you programmed in KRL, if you have written KRL programs, you know that the first thing you put inside a rule is this thing that says select, using, and then a regular expression that's applied against the page. Right? So that is the event expression. So you're going to select this rule whenever there's a page view that matches that regular expression. That's what we've traditionally had. The event language that we are releasing today, it's actually live, is much more complex than that and much more expressive. So for example, instead of select using, you can say this. Select when page view and then the regular expression, and you can set the variable year based on the capture out of the regular expression. So this is essentially exactly the same as if you'd said select using. So there's no difference semantically of this and select using. But in addition to primitive events like page view and change and other things, we also can create event expressions. So this is a valid select expression in KRL. Select when the page view matches that and before the user clicks the button named button. So now we have two things happening in sequence. Before essentially means the first thing happens before the second thing. Doesn't mean that there aren't things that happen in between. If we want them to happen immediately after, then there is then. So this says the same thing, but notice instead of saying before, it says then. So this means the user goes to that page and clicks the button. That's the very next event that the system sees. So nothing else happened. Right? So this is kind of strict sequencing. We can also say and, which means that both of these things happened, but they didn't necessarily happen in any specific order. So either one can happen first, as long as they both happen. Of course, there's or, right, which means that either one happened, but they don't both have to happen. And then there are things like between. So we can say select when the user clicks the button between going to the page that matches archives and going to the page that matches Google.